Well, good morning. A couple of things, not actually a couple, one thing, and then I got like 15 points on my sermon. A couple of things. CSI, what is it? Well, it's going to take place the 21st and October 22nd, which is a Sunday. So I will go from you'll have more information as we get closer, but what is it? It stands for Consider Sleeping In. No, it stands for Consider Serving Instead, which means we want you as a church to not show up on the 22nd, Sunday morning. We want you to be out in the community, being the hands and feet of Jesus. We're going to do random acts of kindness. Some of those acts are going to be with groups that you can sign up for. Some will be maybe small groups, maybe even your family or individuals will be doing things. But we're going to give you some ideas. For example, on Sunday morning, the youth are going to be washing cars for free. We're not giving them literature. We're not going to pass out anything selling our church. We're just helping people. There's going to be some that are going to be involved. Children are going to go to a local nursing home, and they're going to do a little show for those folk. And so the children are going to be involved in this as well. And so there may be someone in your neighborhood, maybe an elderly couple who needs leaves raked or needs some work done on their house. We're going to make this the weekend that the church has left the building, and we're getting into our community. And somebody might ask, well, is that going to have a big change, just one day, one weekend a year? You'll be surprised at how it changes our attitude and our hearts. I always believe that church is something you go from more than you should be going to. You're to be the salt. You're to be the light. Then we are going to meet Sunday evening, that same Sunday, October 22nd, at 6:30, because we want everybody to take pictures. You know, now with the cell phones, we'll send them to a center person that's going to put all those slides together, pictures together, and then as a result of those pictures, we're going to celebrate what it's like to be helping others. And so that's a great service. It'll be at 6:30, October 22nd. And I know you want to give your offering, so we'll take it at 6:30. Okay. All right. Hey, do me a favor. We're going to start one of 3-part series on the prodigal son. So I'd like for you to turn to Luke 15. Luke, I am your father. Luke 15. And as I said before, this is usually called the prodigal son. But that's not a good name. It should be called the prodigal sons. Or it should be called the parable of the loving father. Because we're all in these two boys. And if you look at Luke 15, look at verse 1. This is the context. So look at this. Now here's the prodigal son. They're the tax collectors and the sinners. Now the tax and collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. He's teaching. So the sinners are gathering, Jesus is teaching. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." By the way, my mother used to have a little crochet thing, I don't know what they call it, needlepoint, and it said, "Jesus, the friend of sinners," because it was a good statement. It was never intended to be a nice, polite statement in the New Testament. It was an accusation. So here you have these people, right? You have the sinners are collecting together, Jesus is teaching, and the elder brother is murmuring. As you know, if we went to those first 15 verses, Jesus really tells 3 stories. And every one of those stories involves something getting lost. The first was sheep. It was a sheep that was lost. Second, there was a coin that was lost. And third, there was a son that was lost. So let's look at it. Luke 15:11. Jesus continued. There was a man, and here's the point, who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So the father divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, set off for a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was this severe famine that came to the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Not a good job for a Jewish kid. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare? And I'm starving to death. I will set out, I will go back to my father, and I will say to him," so he rehearses this speech, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired help." So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. And he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The Greek there is imperfect, kept kissing him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now he is found." So they began to celebrate. You know, the first thing we think about when we think of the prodigal son is that in the life of this kid, one day it just sort of occurred to him that living with his dad was a burden. He kept thinking, I would be happier if I was away from my father. I would be happier if I didn't have all these constraints in my life. Sometimes kids just go through that. And I would suggest to you that every time we sin, we do that prodigal thing. We don't quite trust the Father to give us the best. We think we're missing out on something. This father had a prodigal son. Sometimes kids are just tough. James Dobson tells this story about a 2-year-old kid, 2 years old. His name is Frankie, a strong-willed kid. He's a prodigal, 2 years old. And he always fought around authority around the house. And his mother, Dobson writes, one day saw him pull a chair over to the front window and carefully placed it inside the drapes. And he's standing there staring out at the world. When his mother came looking for him, she spotted his legs protruding underneath the drapes. And she went to the other side of the drapes, and she could hear Frankie talk to himself. He was speaking in very sober terms, and he was saying, "I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here." Can you imagine being the father of that 2-year-old son? Well, that's really the story of the prodigal son. I got to get out of here. Here at home, I've always felt that my father, I had to work in his fields, I had to eat at his table, I had to follow his rules. My life would be so much better if I had no rules. I could be my own boss. I could chart my own course. I got to get out of here. And I guarantee you that it is always that evil one that will first plant that thought in your mind. See, being a prodigal doesn't mean that you go to a distant place. It means that you go to a distant way from God. And we can be a prodigal in many areas of our life. Many of us are prodigals in our sexual life. We're far from God. Many are prodigals in their relationships. They're far. It will occur to everyone at some point in their spiritual journey, all of us, one day you will think, I will be happier if I went my own way. I do not trust that if I stay at home with the Father, that it will lead to the best life. Some of you are having those thoughts right now. Some of you are probably tempted to enter into a relationship that you know will dishonor God. You know it, but it feels like it brings love or happiness or pleasure. So you want to leave home. The prodigal son says, my life would be better if I could just get out of here. And here's what he never does. He never thinks it all the way through. He never sees the initial allure. He never thinks about the consequences. One day, the prodigal son decides to leave. It says in verse 12, look at it. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. So now he's no longer thinking it, he's acting on it. That's a huge step. The son says to his father, I want to have my inheritance now. Now understand this. This is not a story about a young guy who appropriately is asserting his independence and to explore his world. Ken Bailey, who's a New Testament scholar, for 15 years, he's been in the Middle East. And he said, I spent 15 years asking people from Morocco to India, from Turkey to Sudan, would there ever be a request like this? And the answer that came back is no way. Well, then what would the fathers do if a child asked for that? They would beat him. The son comes to his father and he says this, I want what's coming to me when you die, but I don't want to wait till you die. In fact, I want to live as if you're dead right now. And the father would have to liquidate all of the assets. Now, in some ways, the most remarkable response to this story is from the father. The father does not do what all of Jesus' listeners would be expecting him to do. This is the kick. The father does not beat his son. The father does not banish his son. The father takes what rightfully belongs to him, the father, what will sustain him in his old age, and he freely gives it to the son. So to Jesus' listeners, this is the part where we need to hear the story with fresh ears. Not only does the father not have to do this, no normal father would ever do such a thing. They would never have heard of a son asking for such a request and would never dream that the father would respond like that. The father allows the son to leave. And it's what's so remarkable about this story. Here is God. The Father is God. Here is God who gives freedom to his children, even when that freedom causes immense pain. Because God hungers so deeply to be in a loving relationship with you, with me. That's why he gave us free will. We're not robots. Robots can't love. Do you remember the movie, The Stepford Wives? How many? Raise your hand. Just confess. That's good. I think it came out twice. It was a remake of it. But if you haven't seen it, it's a kind of a weird movie, but it's called The Stepford Wives, and it's a suburb where real life wives actually get replaced by identical looking but robot wives. Now think about this for a moment, husbands. If you're a husband, imagine this. Imagine this could actually happen. Would you want it? Would you want your real life challenging, sometimes difficult, flesh and blood wife, replaced by a robotic version of herself who was always smiling, always cooking your favorite meals, always laughing at your favorite jokes, always scheduling your favorite activity, doing whatever she needed to do to make you happy. Would you really want that? And the answer to that question is no. Brian, the correct answer is no. It's not possible anyhow, so you shouldn't have even smiled. The son defies the father. He has free will. He defies his obligation. He defies his call for gratitude. And he says, I want to live as if you were dead. And I want to move to a distant country. And the next phrase, look at verse 13. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, and he set off for a distant country. And there he squandered his wealth in crazy living. He turns this temptation to leave into action. And the text, you love it, it says, not long after that, right? When you're moving into sin, or when you're contemplating sin, you don't really spend a lot of time thinking or reflecting upon it. Someone said this, sin is always in a hurry because it knows that it's based on a lie. Remember that there's a passage about Moses in the book of Hebrews 11:25. It says this, Moses chose to be mistreated. Remember, he was the Pharaoh elect. But one day he woke up and he said he chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the passing pleasure of sin. See, we don't talk about that stuff in the church. We don't ever want to say sin is pleasurable. I will say this, sin is pleasurable always, initially, but it's always fleeting. It's always passing. The son knows that he will be rejected by the whole community, so he leaves. He goes to a distant land. Verse 14, after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to the citizens of that country who sent him to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that he was feeding the pigs. No one gave him anything. And this is pain. If you live in a distant country long enough, and you can do that without even leaving Long Valley, if you let your mind go in that direction and you're thinking away from God's thinking, you do that long enough, you will have pain. And the question is, how does he respond to his pain? See, pain teaches some very hard lessons. One writer said that pain plants the flag of reality in the stubborn heart. And that's a huge question for all of us. What are you going to do when pain hits? This young man hits a wall of pain, and here's the key. He no longer has the means to avoid it. See, all the money is gone. Before he could have parties, before he could have lots of distractions. In order to survive, he's now taking care of pigs. This kid is desperate. It's ultimate pain. And then Jesus says, in his pain, verse 17, he came to his senses. He came to himself. He finally acknowledged reality. AA would say he hit bottom. Some of you in this room have areas of pain right now through which God wants to do work. Maybe, if you're honest, you're in a very painful season in your marriage. Maybe you know the pain of feeling maybe unfulfilled in life. Maybe it's the pain of living to please other people all the time, and you feel empty and hollow inside. Maybe you're in pain right now because there's guilt over sin that you've never really dealt with. And here's the choice that's facing you right now. You can mask that pain. You can distract yourself from that pain by getting little momentary happy fixes, going shopping, distracting yourself. People get addicted to all sorts of activities to numb pain. Or you can courageously face the pain in your life. You can acknowledge, I feel pain, and I know ultimately it's over my sin, or it's about the inner emptiness inside me, or it's about a relational failure, or it's about disappointments. But with God's help, I'm going to quit running to a distant country, and I want to deal with it directly. This young man faces the most severe pain that he ever had, and he comes to himself. He faces the truth. And I want to say, he wouldn't have got that place without the pain. So the son composes a little speech. He says in verse 18, I will get up and I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Dad, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm not worthy to be your son. I'm not even thinking about that, but maybe I could come back as a hired hand. He's in his pain. He decides to go back. But he does not envision going back and being fully restored as a son. He doesn't think that's possible. He's going back on the servant plan as a hired servant. I want to pause there just for a moment. That might also be a good question for you. I wonder how many people here today, if you were fully honest, you would say, I understand what it is to be a hired servant. I would try to do things for God all the time, hope that I can work and please Him. But I don't know what it's like to live simply as a loved son or daughter. I don't know God like that. I see Him constantly as someone I have to work for, please. This desperate, starving boy makes the long journey back to his village, utterly crushed by his defeat. And he knows what to expect. He thinks about the moment when he gets back to his village. He will face hostility, open humiliation, and he knows this. He will face it not just from his dad, but from his dad's household. In fact, from the whole village. The boy reaches the outskirts of the village. Word spreads from one home to another. He's back. That kid that did that disgraceful thing is back. I didn't even notice him. He's so skinny. Hardly recognize him. He lost everything that belonged to his father. And as soon as he comes into the village on his way to home, he's going to be mocked, maybe taunted, maybe even physically abused by the village that he scandalized. So the son comes strolling up the street, and the people are gathering for this climactic moment in the story. And then Jesus says these wonderful words. While he was still far off, the Father saw him and was filled with compassion. Then another wonderful phrase in this story. Jesus said about the Father, and he ran to his son. See, Mideast noblemen with flowing robes, they never run. It's a violation of dignity in those days. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, wrote these words, great men never run. Great men are run to. Running is done by children, by those who are desperate or needy or too eager or afraid. I said in the first service, I've never seen John Wayne run. But then I realized none of you know who John Wayne is. He used to walk. Remember, like sideways somewhere. Jesus is saying, this is the heart of God. The Father's heart. Listen, the Father's heart is so full of love that he forgets everything. He forgets his dignity. He forgets his robes. He forgets everybody that's watching. And he only sees the starving, aching, exhausted figure of a son that he had given up for dead. The Father doesn't say anything at all. He starts kissing the Son. And as I said, it's imperfect in its form. So it means he was kissing and kissing and kissing. We don't know how long. There's no word, just tears and embraces and kisses. That's the heart of God toward you. Whoever you are, whatever you've been, whatever you've done, that's the heart of God toward you. God doesn't want you to live as his hired servant. He wants you to be his beloved daughter, son. If you just turn to him, he longs to run to you, to throw his arms around you. That is the heart of the gospel. Finally, the son speaks. Look at verse 21. The son says to his dad, Dad, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Father says nothing. Father wants everyone to know, wants the whole village to know that his son is fully restored. So he sends the servants, and they dress the boy in the finest robe that would dress a king. He puts a ring on his finger, and that's a sign of authority. It also could be almost a sense of a credit card. It's like, here's your credit card. It's authority. He puts shoes on his feet. Shoes on the feet is a mark of a free man, not a slave. And then the Father says, let's party. That's the heart of God. Jesus says that the heart of the Father for you, whoever you are, whatever you've done, it doesn't matter. However bad it seems to you, and you might be saying in your head many times, I know God's not going to put me back. I know I've strained that relationship. No. If you just turn, you will find the Father running to you. I don't know how long you've been in a distant country. Maybe just a little bit. Maybe a few years. Right now is the time to come home. Would you bow? You know, we want to always have a response. We all respond. Sometimes we don't do any response, but that's a response. I invite you right now to spend the next couple of minutes saying to God whatever it is that you need to say to him. Maybe you're aware today that you've been kind of playing around with a temptation for a while, and you realize what it is that you could be throwing away, and you want to stop. Tell God. Maybe you've already taken some steps away from the Father. Maybe there's a pattern of sin going on in your life, and you need to acknowledge and confess it now and put a stop to it before you move any further. Maybe you're here today and you're in great pain. Maybe it's because of enormous guilt. Maybe it's because of tremendous hurt. You need to come to yourself, your senses, and then come to the Father. And for many of us, maybe you've been living like a hired servant, and you long to know the embrace of God as a son, as a daughter. Then tell him that. This is your time to come home. Father, we thank you for your love. Thank you for your grace. And we thank you for this story. Lord, I identify more with the elder brother, the self-righteous, the one that never really went out wild but wished that he had. Lord, speak to us on so many levels. And we want to respond to you now and tell you what's on our heart. We pray it in Christ's name. Amen.